Shit We've Read is a proud member of Bilo Network, a network of geeky podcasts.
Please visit shitwe'veread.com to support the show.
Now, let's talk about some books. Hello, Internet bookworms. Welcome to another episode of Shit We've Read, a sci-fi fantasy book podcast hosted by some geeky friends. My name is Jason Rico, and I will be one of your hosts for this episode. Also on the episode is Bella Romero. Hey, Bella.
Hey, guys.
And joining us as a guest host, back again, is our good friend EmmaSkies.
What's up? Third time's the charm.
Is this your third time?
I think so. Yeah.
Well, welcome back.
Well, my second time on the main show, and then I had a little interlude on our
little After Dark special.
Yeah, After Dark hasn't been released yet as the time this episode comes out.
Well,
but you never know what order people will listen in the future, so maybe
time is a funny thing.
Time is a funny thing. Speaking of time, it is time to talk about what we're going to be talking about on this episode, which is actually really super awesome special episode because we're doing an author interview. We had the privilege of having a discussion with Heather Walter, author of the Malice duology, which includes the books Malice and Misrule, which is out May 10th, which as of the release of this episode was yesterday. So definitely go out and get a copy of that. Now, this duology is a queer fantasy romance, specifically a retelling of the Sleeping Beauty story, but also way better than that, which you'll hear in the interview. We talk at length about that.
It's unlike anything you've read before. That's just unspoiler impression. Unlike anything we've heard.
If you think you know what this retelling is going to be like, you don't.
Yeah. If you think you know Aurora and Maleficent, you do not. Let me tell you.
Well, maybe to give us a little bit more info on what the premise is for this duology, Emma, do you want to read us a synopsis for the first book?
I will. This is much longer than I thought it was. A princess isn't supposed to fall for an evil sorceress, but in this darkly magical retelling of Sleeping Beauty, true love is more than a simple fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a wicked fairy who, in an act of vengeance, cursed a line of princesses to die, a curse that could only be broken by true love's kiss. You've heard this before, haven't you? The handsome prince, the happily ever after. Utter nonsense. Let me tell you, no one in Briar actually cares about what happens to its princesses. Not the way they care about their jewels and elaborate parties and charm-granting elixirs. I thought I didn't care either, until I met her. Princess Aurora, the last heir to Briar's throne. Kind, gracious, the future queen her realm needs. One who isn't bothered that I am Alice, the dark grace, abhorred and feared for the mysterious dark magic that runs in my veins. Humiliated and shamed by the same nobles who pay me to bottle hexes and then brand me a monster. Aurora says I should be proud of my gifts, that she cares for me, even though it was a power like mine that was responsible for her curse. But with less than a year until that curse will kill her, any future I might see with Aurora is swiftly disintegrating, and she can't stand to kiss yet another insipid prince. I want to help her. If my power began her curse, perhaps it's what can lift it. Perhaps together we can forge a new world. Nonsense again. Because we all know how the story ends, don't we? Aurora is the beautiful princess, and I am the villain.
Wow,
spoiler warning.
Nice job.
I only tripped once. Yay!
Yeah, cold
I was going to cut that out, but you just read it on yourself.
You can cut that part out too. They don't need to know.
Yeah, that's just this personal celebration, Rico. Come on.
That's just for all of us here.
Yeah, that's for us.
Just for us. Okay. That is an interesting synopsis. I can't recall the last time I've read a synopsis that was told from the perspective of one of the characters. Like it's.
Okay. Yeah. I think about that.
Like it's almost like.
Are you forgetting Twilight? Come on. And so the lion
Twilight.
fell in love with the lamb.
Oh my God, you're right.
I am forgetting Twilight on purpose. I'm forgetting Twilight. I am always forgetting Twilight.
Okay.
Although I thought
Rico,
about Twilight on the drive.
The Twilight hate is so 2010, Rico. Okay,
Exactly.
it's not a good
Robert
look for you.
Pattinson said so.
Yeah, that was a quote from him. I was quoting him.
I was actually thinking about Twilight on the drive into this recording session.
Yeah. Well, when do I not think about Twilight?
Christina Perry song came on the radio. I'm like, that is probably by far the best thing that came out.
I'll love you for 1,000 years.
Oh, I love that song.
And I'll love you for 1,000 more. You love that song?
I do love that song.
It's like my least favorite song from her.
I know, same.
I'm not saying it's the best song. I'm saying it's the best thing from the movie for me. Like, the song is actually...
Of all the freaking amazing music in those movies, that's what you latched onto?
Not Supernatural Black Hole?
But that
Supermassive Black Hole.
Supermassive Black Hole by one of my
Supermassive.
favorite bands, Muse. No, I know that song very well. But that is a song that existed outside of the movie. Wasn't Christina
Chop
Perri's
and
song...
Change is on my playlist. Plays all the time. How Can You Swallow So Much Sleep? Legendary. Those albums are ridiculously good. I stand by it to this day. We have gotten so off topic immediately.
All right, let's bring it back in.
Mentioned Twilight one time.
It's like when we mentioned Star Wars, Rico and I just go off the rails.
There you go.
We're not gonna do that.
We're not gonna do that
right now, Rico. We're not gonna do it.
Anyhow, let's get back on track. We talked with Heather, who was amazing, and we had a great interview with her, which we will cut to in a bit. However, we do want to give a spoiler warning. As much as we try to avoid specifically going into spoilers, they kind of came up organically in the discussion. Both spoilers for the first book, Malice, and spoilers for the second book, Misrule. I would say in general they're pretty light. It's not going to ruin the reading of these books by any means. However, they're kind of there. And I'd rather not cut them out. I want to just kind of keep the interview.
He's lazy. Really.
There's that. But
you need to get your ass up and work, Rico.
It's hard clicking the button to make an edit here and then pasting it here. It's a lot. It's a lot. Anyhow.
It's like 3 buttons.
Yeah. I mean, really, how hard is your job?
It's like 4. I got to do like keyboard, like shortcut.
You know what? All I keep hearing is like more and more buttons
finger,
every time you complain.
And then,
what's the truth, Rico?
The moral of the story is just be warned that we may touch upon some things. So if you haven't read the books yet, which given the fact that the second book just released yesterday, there's a good chance maybe you haven't read it yet.
Well, we're pretty light on the Misrule spoilers, I think.
Very light.
Except for one instance where we do preface the moment with a warning.
Yeah, we do discuss the ending of the book. And that is, I think, when we mention the warning, because it's a pretty big spoiler. So
yes.
We caught ourselves. We were good about it.
And we do call it out in the episode as well, in the interview. Yes. We do say the spoilers are coming. So you're being warned here.
You've been warned.
You'll be warned again in the future. So with that warning, let's go ahead and kick it to our interview with Heather Walter. Enjoy. Hi there. How's it going?
Oh, pretty chill. It's late for you guys, right? Like, I appreciate you.
No, we're earlier than you.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought you were UK based.
Oh, no. We're California.
Oh, okay, cool. That makes a lot more sense. This morning,
I was so you're thinking it's like midnight for us,
like 10 p.m. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh.
I wish I was in the UK.
Yeah, same.
No, I'm here. Well, let's start off with just kind of getting to know a little bit about yourself. I mean, I read your bio and you were an English teacher and now you're a librarian. Those are both my dream careers. So I'm very interested in hearing about, I'm really curious to hear about your experience and how it led you to this path of writing novels. And let's just kind of start there at the beginning.
Yeah, sure. So for me, writing, I think most writers will tell you I wrote most of my life, like little stories when I was a kid. But I'm also really a practical person. And so the idea of writing for a career was really scary to me. And it still is scary to me, even though I'm doing it. The paychecks aren't stable. They don't it's not a very secure job position, because basically at any given time, you can lose the demand for your work. And then, where are you? So I was really worried about that and just the rejection and whatever. So I did go the route of, I went to undergrad. I was an English major. I graduated. I thought, what am I going to do with this now? Like every other English major who graduates with a degree in English. What do I do with this? And so I actually had a connection in education. And they kind of helped steer me towards that route. And then in the classroom, I very quickly discovered, as much as I love the kids, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So that kind of led me. I loved books, I loved reading, and I loved getting kids to read specifically. And so I went to library school at first actually thinking I was going to do public libraries, but with my background in education, it made more sense to go back into the school and do school libraries. And so that's where I am. I'm actually a middle school librarian, and I've been there for 7 years. So I have that, and then I do the writing. So it is 2 full-time jobs that I am currently juggling. But yeah, the reading, of course, definitely pushed me towards the writing. I've always been interested in stories and narrative form, specifically how the same person, how different people can tell the same story in different ways, and can notice different things or have different takes about something. And so that was something that when I decided to start writing again, because before I decided to go to library school, there was a hot minute when I was going to go get my MFA. But again, that practical side of my brain kind of kicked in and thought, well, what are you going to do with that after you get that MFA?
Yeah.
Which to anybody out there getting your MFA, like absolutely go for it, do it, like whatever seems right and calls to you. I just did not go that route, but I did circle back to writing. It's kind of been something that I've been circling and circling and circling for my whole life, and finally just kind of was like, okay, we're gonna do it. We're gonna write the book, and we did.
Well, you mentioned that what kind of books and stories that you like. Are there any books in particular that you've enjoyed reading and inspired this big fairy tale retelling that you started with Malice and Misrule?
We get asked that question a lot, and it's that one's really hard for me to point at any one particular book. But when I was younger, I really liked retellings. I've always loved retellings. I think for me, it goes back to that fascination with how the same story can get told multiple ways, depending on either who's telling it or the setting or whatever. But I was particularly drawn, like I loved the Marissa Myers Cinder series, how she just took the Cinderella,
Yes.
like
I think we all love
completely
those.
reimagined.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
And then even when I was reading the Throne of Glass and Court of Thorns and Roses, and how I could be like, this is pretty much Beauty and the Beast. And so like I really liked doing that. I have always really been drawn to the fairy tale retelling and looking at how authors can take parts of it and kind of stitch it up into something else. And I really, really liked that, especially like Naomi Novik's Uprooted was amazing. And her Spitting Silver also was just so imaginative and so great. So yeah, any of those stories that could just, and any story that really transported me into another world, because I was not super happy with my status quo, like as a teenager. Like I feel like most teenagers are not very happy with their status quo. But I really didn't want to be where I was. And so any book that could pick me up and take me into another world, I almost exclusively read fantasy or historical fiction, things that, like I said, presented this completely alternate reality. I almost never read realistic fiction because I was just like, if it's our world, I'm out. Like,
Relatable. Yeah.
That's me. That's me.
Yeah.
Those were the two genres that I was definitely still drawn to, but definitely drawn to as a youth. So I really understand that.
Yeah.
I think those are the best categories in my opinion. But
Same.
so what drew you to this fairy tale in particular, Sleeping Beauty, and why a sapphic retelling?
So for this particular book, one thing that always kind of struck me about the Sleeping Beauty story, even when I was really young watching like the animated version, was the fact that there is just a single dark fairy in every version that you read. There's just one of her, which I thought was really weird. Even as a kid, I was like, why are there like all of these good fairies floating around and then the one bad one, and then they decide like not to invite her? Like that seems like really counterintuitive. And then when she got mad about not being invited to the baby's birthday or whatever the version says, and then shows up and decides to curse the child, which at the same time, like even as a really young child watching these, I kind of thought, why did she even want to go? Like, it doesn't really seem like she would like babies anyway. So like, I feel like this is not her scene. So I was fascinated with this character who kind of resided on the outskirts of society, was clearly not accepted by those around her, even though she had these very powerful gifts. And also, why did she live by herself, and why did she have such an extreme reaction to what most people would consider like kind of an oversight or even a small slight, like not that much. So I was always very curious about this particular character. Malice was not the first book that I wrote to get my agent or even that we tried to sub. And so when I decided to write a second novel while my first one was being shopped to editors, I came back to this character because for me, that's like really what it is. Like I have to be fascinated with a character in order to write their story. Like I have to really want to know like who they are, where they're coming from. I think as readers, it kind of translates pretty naturally because if you don't love the character, like you're not going to love the story. And so I kind of came back to this character and started digging around and wanted to figure out like, why is she the only one? Why is she alone? How would that feel if you were in this world that apparently celebrates good magic, what they call good magic, and you have what they deem as evil magic? Like, how would that feel as a person? And then what would instigate such a huge, extreme reaction of implementing a curse or basically like destroying the world as they knew it? It couldn't have been just a missed invitation. Like it had to have been something bigger. And so when I thought about like possible motivations for this character, I thought, well, the only force on earth that I know that can push someone to be so destructive in a snap decision is love. And so I thought, what that was the first kind of seed of an idea of what if this is not some, ancient dark fairy, but she's really just this, sorceress in her youngish years, the same age as the princess, and they are actually in love. And the story unfolds so that the decision stems from a jealous kind of love, or however you want to look at the kind of love that they share.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting idea, and I could tell how much you loved Alice in the book. I mean, we were talking about it before you joined. Emma in particular pointed out how you could understand Alice's reasoning for everything, even if it was a terrible decision
Yeah.
and you wanted to shake her and be like, stop doing that. Stop stalking Aurora in the gardens. Like, she does not want you following her and eavesdropping. Like, she hates that. It's everything that her parents did to her before. No one trusts her. You could understand it because she was just her, you were in her head. And you really brought that character to life. And it was just incredible. I think the way that you described the characters, and just really got to know the ins and outs of who she was. Yeah, I really wanted to say that before we
Thank
get
you.
into, just because you brought it up. I'm sure we were going to mention it later, but I just felt that was a really organic time to talk about it. Did you ever feel like that fairy tale though might have constrained your story in any way? Like, if there was any like, did you have any thoughts about people and what they might think about such a different way of retelling this? I don't think I've ever heard this side of, what would have been Maleficent's story. I'm assuming, right? Alice, Malice, Maleficent. Um, yeah, did you have any thoughts about how to break that barrier, or sorry, that expectations, and reshape it, and what was a really creative and well thought out way?
No, like, so the beauty of fairy tale retellings is that you can really do kind of whatever you want. And so it's like I had the bones of the story, and the original versions are very, very short. Like they're 3, 5 pages, maybe. And so they really don't give you much to go on anyway. So it's really just kind of like you take this seed and you put it in different soil, if we're going to keep up with this metaphor, and kind of see what comes of it, right? And so we each have our own different like medium that we can put it in and like see what comes. So I just tried to let it grow organically. What I worried about with Alice, which I was very much proven wrong on, is I did worry when I was writing her that she was too whiny, that she was just this kind of like Eeyore character that like everybody hates me. Like, what am I going to do? And so I worried about that. And a lot of times when you write extremely strong women like that who make decisions that are not always popular, they can come across as unlikable. And so I really worried about how readers were going to perceive her. And I wanted to write a villain with Alice that was not not really apologetic about what she did. Like I really didn't want her to seem like, oh, she did everything because everybody was so mean to her. And I didn't really want to create this character who like the readers pitied. So it was kind of like this like tightrope that I was walking. Luckily for me, Alice was very loud in my head. She came onto the page pretty much fully formed, to the point that if I spent a long time writing or editing, I found myself kind of like skulking around, or like the real world, like continuing to channel her and like just her grumpy pettiness all the time. But I was very much proven wrong with my worries about how Alice herself would be perceived. So many readers have resonated with her, and I feel like that is because Alice is a character who perhaps experiences things that on a universal level that we've all kind of experienced. She does the things that we either want to do or have thought about doing, like stalking our, exes slash lovers, slash whatever.
Ye old
Eaves,
Facebook. Yeah.
yeah, eavesdropping where we shouldn't. Even the petty stuff, like in book one, when she curdles Rose's milk and like makes her teeth turn black, like just like the little stuff that she does here and there has resonated, and people were rooting for her kind of like no matter what she did, which was very interesting to me, especially at the end of book one where so many people were on Alice's side. And I'm like, did you read what she did?
That Colonel Milk scene felt good to read.
Yeah.
That one's like
that I agree. That was one of my favorite parts. And like the psychological warfare in which she like made Rose think that she was losing her powers, she was fading. I was like, that's so brutal.
Yeah.
But I love it. Like,
Yeah.
give me more. Like, I was actually kind of bummed when she stopped. I was like, oh, we could have taken this a lot further.
Yeah.
Keep going. She deserved it. But I think we all know, a Regina George, a Rose in our lives. And I think that was what was so great about your book is you do so much for representation, especially. So there's like two areas in particular that I want to talk about in that representation realm. One that I actually like kind of just realized in reading Misrule is the representation of like the half breed, the sort of like I don't fit into any box. As someone who is half white and half Latina, like I felt that my entire life, and I realized that's why I loved Alice. There were a couple parts in Misrule in particular where she's talking about like how am I expected to know the shifter history, the Vila history? Who was going to teach me that? When I was stuck in the Briar Court, stuck with these people who forced me my entire life to be like them, I felt that very deep within my soul. I get told all the time how I seem white, but they know that I'm not because I don't look it. But I'm too Mexican for the white kids, and I'm too white for the Mexicans, and so I'm just kind of who I am. And I really felt that. And also in gender, like never really fitting in a box. Like I embrace all energies. And I just like really felt that about Alice too, that she throughout the book really embraces her strength and that malice that she does feel inside of her and really owns it at the end of the first book and turns into Nimara and embraces that identity. And that just felt really strong for me. It was very cathartic. My inner child was very happy. Because it's like, yeah, let's get a little revenge and become who we are and like own these differences that actually make us stronger. Like she embraces both halves of her magic. And then in Misrule, like really takes it to the next level by really accepting the shifter energy and realizing it is her strength, not oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name.
Namar.
Mortania?
Mortania.
Yeah, Mortania. Okay. Yeah, she says, it was never Mortania, it was always me. And I was like, yes, exactly. It was always you. She gave her that self-confidence. That's really all it was that positive self-talk she never had growing up in the predominantly Grace world, the Fae world. But then also we have a beautiful sapphic a complicated, beautiful sapphic love story, as most love is weird and twisted. Everyone's got their story. But I just, it was a really beautiful way that felt organic to the characters. It didn't feel, there was no queer baiting. There's no like, why aren't they together? Like they obviously love each other. Like they really owned that love. And the community itself, like I loved you kind of tossed it in there, but I felt it of like, oh, of course there's, same-sex couples everywhere, but it's actually the power struggle and like this, the patriarchal usurpers, right? The kings who want to gain their power. I don't know. That was really interesting to me. And I'm just curious, like, what was so important for you to tell that story? How did you kind of get there? And if I'm missing anything or misinterpreting anything, please correct it for our listeners. But I thought those were two really powerful pieces of representation in your book. Love to learn more.
Yeah, I'm glad that she resonated with you in that way. It's always so interesting to me because, like, as writers, we're just putting words on the page, and if in no way when I was writing was I like, yes, I want people to feel this or that,
Yeah.
So seeing how the words do resonate is always so wonderful for us, because we cannot possibly knowingly represent all of these areas, especially those to which we do not belong. So the fact that we do kind of reach into those areas without realizing it and without even intending to in a positive way is just so wonderful and affirming, and speaks really to the power of books in general, and stories in general. But yeah, for Alice, the outsider is definitely what I wanted to show. And I did that probably a little less intentionally than I realized. I think it was easy for me to write because it was something that I felt growing up for sure. And not even in, a powerful way where people saw me and put me in a box or whatever. It was more just like, I knew that there was something that I didn't quite fit in where I was, whether it was my family's super religious and I never got
Mm,
into it. So I had that, kind of going for
yeah.
me. I was never into the high school scene of people wanting to go this, that, or the other. Like I just never really fit anywhere, and I knew it about myself. So I think that translated pretty naturally into Alice. But the queerness that you talk about and the world in which I kind of very deliberately did toss in that there were other same-sex couples. And the problem with Alice and Aurora being together was not the fact that they were both women, except for,
Mhm.
yes, the kings hang up on, how we're going to have an heir, and, you can't, that,
Yeah.
that for sure. But at the same time, I feel like there are so many wonderful stories that exist that talk about queerness not being accepted and those characters hitting obstacles because of that. But that cannot be the only story, so like we
Yeah.
have to have more stories with queerness where it is just as accepted as straight couples. And acceptance doesn't mean, oh, look at that queer couple and they are so cute
Yeah.
and they belong here. Like it needs to be just like not even spoken about. Like it needs to be as
Yeah.
seamless as
Yeah.
the straight couples. And my hope is that, one day that is the current reality. It seems very far off, but we're a lot further than we used to be. But it's like I tell people all the time, like we don't have coming outs for straight people. Like they don't have to like work up the nerve to go and tell their parents and their family, like, I only like the opposite sex. And I feel so much better about that now. Like they don't have they don't have to do that. They don't have to
Yeah.
worry about being ostracized. Like, and so I wanted to present a world where it was okay. It was just okay for them to be together. And the reason why, I mean, ultimately it's not okay for them to be together, but it has nothing to do with the fact that it's two women. And so, yes, that was very, very deliberate because I wanted to present a fantasy world in which that was not the reason for them not being able to be together. And that was not the reason why Alice was facing all of the scrutiny and um, the bullying and stuff that she does face. But I feel like it's important to have more of those stories where queerness is not only just accepted and celebrated, but just normal. Like, can we
Yeah.
just make it
The
normal?
normalization of that relationship, and like you said, it wasn't the obstacle, which I thoroughly appreciated because you're right. I think growing up as a younger millennial, that was what the narrative was. It was like you have to overcome, like kind of like the Dear Simon. Not
Yeah.
love that story,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
think that all of those have a place, and
Yep.
that's still being experienced, around the country. We have conservative states, trying to pass don't say gay bills and transgender bathroom bans. This is very much still a reality. But for a lot of these kids who are there, I think the stories like what you've written can be aspirational and inspiring and hopefully empower, where it's like there is a world outside of where you are where this is accepted. There are people who see these stories and are just they're living them and they're writing them, and they're it does get better, and there's hope out there. And I really appreciated that as someone who is currently teaching middle schoolers.
Oh
I
yeah,
yeah I
they
love
need
this
it.
book and they
Yeah,
need this, and
yeah.
I definitely normalize that in my classroom when they're like, you know, I had to come out as straight in my classroom because they
Mm-hmm.
were like, "Are you gay? Please tell us you're gay." And I was like, "I'm so sorry."
Sorry.
Like I've tried, you guys. It's
That's
just
right.
I've tried. But I'm the gayest straight person you'll know, I promise. And and
Didn't
I was
work.
like, yeah, because I was like my partner, my fiance, they were like, "Who are you marrying?" And I was like, "I'm so sorry. The cisgender man." And
I
so,
let
but
you
like
down.
I let you down because I came in like my pronouns are, they, them, like the she, they, like whatever you want to call me. I don't really care. And they were like, really waiting for that moment. And I was like, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I like the opposite sex. Like, they were understandably supportive. Like, and that was like, this is what should be normalized. And this
Yes.
generation gives me hope that that's what we're doing. And I think your book is just a great example of like we're heading in the right direction.
Yes.
I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but I'm crossing my fingers that we
I
do.
hope so too. I hope so too.
Yeah. So if there's a moral to get from this story, because as we know, all fairy tales have a moral. What is something that you hope people would take away? That our listeners who want to read the books, or those who have read Malice and are looking forward to Misrule, what's sort of the takeaway that you hope that everyone gets? Like we're all clearly rooting for a good villain,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more complicated than that. Villains are fun to write and talk about, but what are we learning here?
And it's funny you talk about morals. I think I'm on a podcast later where they're asking me about the moral of the story as well.
Mhm.
And so I've been thinking about morals, and we know that fairy tales were written to be instructive, really. Red Riding Hood, don't go into the woods, you'll get eaten by a wolf. Don't talk to strangers. Just safety things a lot of the times, and how to be a quote good person, as it was back then. And I think that morals are just so highly subjective, and it like goes back to
Mm.
people being able to tell us the same story in different ways, and people taking things from stories in ways that was not intended, or was deeper than intended, or however it is that specifically speaks to them. So whatever readers get out of the story, I'm just happy that they read it, and I hope that they found something that resonated with them. But if I were to pick something that I hoped that readers were to take away, I think it would be to find your power and to not be afraid of it. Because I mean, when I was writing Alice, when you're writing a villain, it's interesting because like the idea of writing a villain is great. You're like, yes, we're going to get to write about all of the bad things that people do. But then you go in there and you start writing and you start trying to write these quote bad things. And you get to the problem of, motivation and why are they doing this? Because if you just write a true mustachy twisty villain, you got a sociopath. And my personal belief about villains is that all sociopaths are villains, but not all villains are sociopaths. And so the tricky part about writing a villain, for me, is I'm not really interested in writing a sociopath. And some people can, and they can do it great, and that's wonderful. There's like very entertaining stories out there about sociopaths. But for me, like I want to write a real human villain, and it even opens up a very interesting conversation about like what makes a villain, and is Alice actually a villain, or is she just a human? And so circling back to your original question, what do we want readers to take away from this? Is to find that power like Alice did, and not, obviously not magical power, whatever, but really the power that Alice found over the 2 books was her own strength and self-acceptance, and the learning her limitations and what she would and wouldn't do, and not being afraid of her own strength, but also knowing how to wield that strength. And I think that regardless of what we do with it, we all have kind of this inner strength inside of us. And a lot of times we're afraid to flex that. We might be afraid of what we're capable of doing. We might be afraid of what we're too afraid to do almost. But if Alice taught me anything from writing her, it's just to just go with it and see what happens, to a point.
You mean I shouldn't burn down
What?
a city in the self-discovery process?
Yeah.
Don't commit arson. Got it. Okay.
That's the most important step of the process.
Yeah, I thought like lighting fire, set fire to the rain, as Adele says.
Every interview I give, I'm always just like, this is gonna get played back in court one day. Heather Walter told me. No kids.
Yeah.
Don't do arson.
Any kids listening out there? Well, I'm going to actually kick it now over to Emma, because we'd love to know a little bit about the publishing process.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm always heavily like, what I always want to know about is the background of it, the actual writing process, even, just from the conception to actually getting published to getting on the shelves to things like that. So I guess the place to start there is like, what was your general process for going from your initial idea of Malice, of this retelling that you wanted to do, to actually getting published? And like, did you know from the beginning that it was going to be a duology? Kind of, how did that work?
Good questions. So the first germ of the idea was actually in the Notes app on my phone, and I still have
Love
it.
that.
Yeah, and I was just like, what if I did a dark fairy story and she's gay and she gets bullied by everybody and everybody hates her? And that's pretty much, I think, the extent of the note in my phone. I have like all of my running little book baby ideas in there. But then I actually did go back and, like, in all caps, you wrote this book and it sold. To remind myself that it happens. So from there, like I said, it was not the first book that I wrote or even tried to sell. And so while that first book was on sub, I drafted Malice. I think from first draft to putting that on sub was maybe, let's say, first draft to actually sale was 9 months. And that is fast.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, that is not a normal speed. Alice was a very clear character in my mind. She very much wanted to come out onto the page. I'm currently working on a story where the character is not like that, and it's taking
no
a lot
pun
longer.
intended.
Yeah,
on the coming out.
yeah. Clearly wanted to do that. So every book, every character is different, but because her voice was so clear in my head, it was very easy to get her on the page. But I wrote my first draft and I sent that to my agent, who is typically my beta reader. And she came back and was basically like pointed out all of the very real flaws in the book. And so I took that and digested it. One of the biggest ones was in that first draft that I sent her, Aurora. It was not like the Aurora from Malice. She was very quiet, never really kind of decided anything on her own. So basically I wrote a sleeping princess for my Sleeping Beauty retelling. So I needed to go and kind of like beef her up a little bit, and some of the plot things weren't working out, just inconsistencies. So in 5 weeks or whatever, she had some life stuff going on. I had some life stuff going on. And so she was like, if we want to get this out to editors, I need this back in like 5 or 6 weeks. And so in that time, I did a full rewrite.
Wow.
Which, yeah, it was intense. That was some of the most intense writing that I've done. Not
on top of your full-time job?
Yeah, on top of my full-time job.
Oof. Yeah.
And so I did that, and then I sent her the new draft. She was into it, and decided it was ready, or we decided it was ready. And then that draft went out end of June, and then it sold like 3 weeks later, which was
Wow.
also very, very fast, especially if you're listening today and you're trying to get published. I have another manuscript kind of floating around with editors right now. It's been floating around for like 9 months. So the speed right now is very, very slow, but that was fast even for then. And then anytime you sign a book contract, it's typically about 18 months from the time that you accept the author offer and before it really comes out on shelves. So it sold in July of 19, and then Malice came out in April of 21. So it was a good chunk of time in there, but that's pretty normal with all the publishing. Like they've got to find a cover designer, and you've got to go through developmental edits and line edits and kind of all this in between stuff. You're always working on this book, and then it finally hits the shelves, and it's kind of like it's almost anticlimactic because you're like, it's here, okay, we're done. But the duology question, I did not. I pictured the end of Malice as like done. I was like, this is she did it. She did
I'm
the thing.
shocked. Okay.
Everyone always is.
That's
Everyone
so
is.
bold.
And I didn't really see a problem with it, but my editor was like, no. She was like,
I like your editor.
She's always
agree.
right. She's always right. But yeah, she, on our phone call when we were discussing, potentially her offer, I had sent because she sent my agent, like, what would book 2 look like? And I was like, book 2, wow. So I just like put together whatever and was just like, there, she can look at that. And I think it was actually, I want to say book 2 was my original envision for it was from the prince's point of view for a good chunk of the book. Like it took place. I know it was so random because I was just like, and so then on the call, she was like, we saw your synopsis. And I think readers are going to want more from Alice. Again, correct.
They were right. Yeah.
She is always right. So of course at the time, it was my first novel. I was like, this is it. I'm going to make it. This is my time. And so I was just like, yeah, sure. Whatever. Book 2 is Future Heather's problem. Future Heather figured it out. It's fine. She wrote book 1. Like she didn't do anything. Which Future Heather, I think I tweeted once, the thing about Future Heather is that she can do everything I want her to. And that the problem with Future Heather is that she actually does not exist because Future Heather is always in the future. And then by the time I get to her, it's just me. So yeah, Misrule, I make no secret of how difficult it was to write. And if we're still talking about process, I'm very type A. Like I told you before, I like to kind of like, it's weird to say it like this, but if it's kind of like, if you know kind of things. I like my project to be finished before I start it. I like to know exactly the steps to do. And so that writing Misrule made me realize how much of a lightning strike book Malice was. And if you are not familiar with that term, it's kind of something that we authors talk about as the book was just really easy. It just like came. Even when I talk about that big rewrite in the middle, it was actually a very easy book to write. Misrule was not it. I turned in a draft in the fall of 20 because it was due, and my editor sent back a long edit letter, which she's always right. And so I redid it, complete rewrite, sent it back to her in the summer. End of summer, I got another letter. That one was like really like, she's right. She's absolutely right. But I was just like, I have no idea how to fix this. So it's like calls and whatever. And they're like, well, we really need this book by like fall again. So in about 3 months, I had to completely overhaul and rewrite the book.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So this, when we're talking about my process, Heather's process is that she writes a whole bunch of crap and then she has to rewrite it in a very short amount of time. And then that's
that
the book
gives me
everybody
anxiety
reads.
just hearing you talk about it.
It was a lot. It was a lot of like, like very long days of writing. And then I joked to my neighbors. I was like, they're like, how do you do this? And I'm like, I wander around my house and talk to imaginary people, which is pretty much the process of writing a book. But yeah, no, it worked out. It got on there. The book was finished. I wrote. It was a tough book to write, but I have full belief that every book, every piece that I work on, every character that I work through makes me a stronger writer. So in a lot of ways, I'm very grateful for these experiences, because without them, if book writing was easy, it would be boring for me. So every difficult situation, every difficult part of my process makes me better. So I'm grateful for that.
So as far as like, obviously writing the books was two wildly different experiences. But on a character level, like Alice and Namara is almost to a certain extent a different character. Like she's almost a different person. She's still the same, but she's got a very different life that she's leading. How difficult was it for you to kind of switch over from who she was in Malice to who she is throughout Misrule, or how different was that for you?
Oh, that was the crux of the problem right there.
I had a feeling.
And typically anytime I'm having an issue with the book that I'm writing, it's because the character is not clear. My mind gets caught up on the issue of what is going to happen in the book. But what I have to keep backtracking and telling myself, and what I encourage anyone who's trying to write a book themselves, is to ask yourself is, what would your character do? And like really get to know the character, because it sounds weird, maybe. I don't know. It sounds like something only a writer would say, which is probably true. But your characters, these imaginary people, will tell you what is supposed to happen in your novel. But you have to listen to them. You have to get to know them. So for Nimara / Alice in Misrule, the block that I was hitting, and the reason why I had to keep rewriting that book, is because I was approaching her with my own quote moral standards. And so when I thought about the end of book 1, I thought, she did this quote very bad thing, and she should feel bad about this. And so in the first few drafts that I wrote, she's running around continually trying to make up for the fact that she torched everything. And Aurora is understandably very mad at her, and she's just trying to smooth things over and make things better. But I finally got to this point with her where I thought, what if she doesn't feel bad? Like, what if she fully recognizes that Aurora is mad, and she understands kind of why Aurora is mad, but it's also like I had a very eye-opening conversation with my editor where she asked me these very pointed questions of, if Alice feels upset, like, why is she upset? And if Aurora is mad at Alice for, obvious reasons, but at the same time, I had to really kind of step back and realize, probably because I myself come from a place of privilege, I was not able to see that Aurora comes from a place of ultimate privilege. And so she's asking Alice to just kind of like be falling over herself, apologizing for all the stuff that she did, but never once does Aurora apologize for everything that happened in Alice's life. And Alice was downtrodden. They tried to erase her and her entire culture and her entire history. And so would someone who lived in a world that was literally trying to erase her at the same time as they were trying to exploit her, would they actually feel bad about what they did? And once I kind of took my own like thoughts of it and like just broke my mind free of my own hangups and what I might feel, and started to think about what this character might feel, then it became a lot clearer. Like, so again, I was not listening to my character for basically 15 months. And then when I finally kind of broke those barriers and thought, what would this Namara person feel? And the answer to that was, she'd feel great. She would feel empowered and like she was finally where she had a right to be. Then it became a lot easier after that. But yeah, it was very, very tough at first. And I think all writers kind of face this difficulty of, we all come to the page with our own prejudices, our own places of privilege, our own thoughts and moral codes and whatever. And the more we can shake free of those and just let our characters be characters, the more memorable they become.
Yeah.
So just kind of a follow-up to that, because you have me thinking, do you feel like it was easier to write Aurora this time around than Alice? It sounded like Alice was easy for you to write the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And this time around, was it easier for you to write Aurora because you guys have like a similar perspective, or was she still hard?
She was a lot easier. Well, she kind of took on the mantle of like the angry one, because she wakes up and she was like,
Yeah.
"What did you do?" Um,
What'd you do with my kingdom?
yeah,
Yeah.
like this
I
is
gave you the
mine.
keys and this is what
Yes.
happened. Yeah, you locked me out.
Yes, and so that part was easy, but it was a very eye-opening conversation that I had with my editor when I did realize, like, oh, like Aurora has enormous privilege. Because to me, I always kind of felt for Aurora, because I'm just like, oh, your dad is really mean to you, and no one takes you seriously because you're a woman, and they don't really expect you to really rule, and so that resonated with me. But when you kind of broke down her layers, like there are a lot of ways that she had power over Alice without even realizing, with her money and her status and the fact that everybody loved her and doted on her. And those were things that, and the fact that her culture was celebrated while Alice's was not. And so those were things that allowed me to look at this character in a different way, some layers in myself as well, about how we don't kind of realize our own in prejudices and things, that we might be carrying around and stuff like that. So writing Aurora this time around was interesting for me, both like as a writer and just as a person, to look at this and be like, oh yeah, like she's got a lot of issues going on that she probably doesn't even realize either.
Yeah. This is why I love fantasy books. You can like process these
Yeah.
really complex internal struggles,
Yeah.
but be like, oh, but like she's a princess and, she's a bad fairy. And like, how would that play out? And it makes those topics so much more easy to digest, but also kind of put a name to, like you said, like, oh, it's about privilege. Like, I didn't even think about that. And even you putting those words, it's like, that's exactly what it is. And I
Yeah.
think that's ultimately why this resonates. I think will resonate with a lot of readers when they read Misrule. So, yeah, thank
And
you.
then one final question on like at least the publishing process of it. This is mostly just like my own personal. I'm always curious about this. What are your like favorite steps in the process, and what do you hate to do between like drafting and copy, line development, edits, revisions, whatever it may be?
Probably the one I hate the most, which is the one that I need to do, is that like character development. Because like once I have my idea, I like want to start running immediately. And I'm a word count person. And so if I'm not getting words on the page, if I'm not progressing through the story at a pace that I think is a good pace, I feel like I'm wasting time. But as you can see from my descriptions, all that time catches back up with me, because then I inevitably have to rewrite and have to redo. And some of that is inevitable. Like a big part of my process is getting into the story, hitting a block, realizing why I've hit that block, and then having to go back. And I think that is part of my process. I've been trying to think of ways to avoid that. And I think it's pretty much impossible to avoid. I think that's just like part of it. But I'm very impatient, so that's why I don't like it. But I do like it because I get to know my characters and stuff like that. I don't like drafting either. It's always wrong. It's just the blank page, like no. And I've tried to like name my drafts like cutesy things, and it just like nothing. I just don't like it. So I really, though, I take a lot of pride and just love when I have that ugly first draft that I know doesn't work and I know something's wrong with it. And I'm working with it and it transforms and there's something that clicks in it, and it's a feeling. It's difficult to describe, but it's a feeling that I get while I'm in the piece of just like overall rightness. And I'm just like, this is it. Here we are. We have made it. And there really is not a feeling quite like that. And once I hit that, that's when I know that the piece is where it should be. So that's my favorite part for sure. And then just like I joked with my editor, I was like, I wish I'm the only one that would appreciate this, but sometimes I wish I could like show the world what I took, like the first draft and what it became, and then they would appreciate me and what I did. But no one wants that.
I don't know. I think me and Emma would want that. I would love that.
I'm always super curious, like how
Yeah.
different a finished product is from the first draft.
For me, it's a lot from Malice, from first draft to finish. There are a lot of scenes that remained actually, and there are from Misrule, it's pretty different. There are some scenes that were there the whole time. My favorite scene from Malice that was there from the first draft to the finished one is when she's at the dinner and the people at the table are messing with her and she gets tired of them. And so she like saws off that too big piece of meat and stuffs it in her mouth, and like all the juices like run down her face all red. And she's just like, what do you guys think about me now? I wrote that in a coffee shop and was just like, and it stuck. So,
Oh, I've definitely done that whenever
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, like you're gonna eat that much food?" And I'm like,
Yup.
absolutely.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I
Yes,
am. I am going to eat all that food because you know what? I am hungry,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that scene. I'm really glad I'm glad that was your favorite too.
Yeah, I loved it. It just shows her pettiness. Like she's just so just like does not care.
And I think that's why she's so relatable.
Yeah.
We're
She
all
does
really
what we
petty.
all what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's petty. If you say you're not, you're just lying to yourself.
Yes, you
because we
are.
all are.
And you mentioned
love
being a word count person. What is the word count for Misrule?
Oh.
I'm mostly
I think
asking because like I spreadsheet all of my reading and I have a specific column for word count and I can't find anything for Misrule. So
I
I don't
think
know what
it's
to
like-
put in.
I think it's 116.
Okay.
I
I just
think
need that
that's
for my
what
own
it
notes.
is. I think it's 116. Yeah.
Every
I'd have
time I
to
look at
pull
how
up.
many words a book is, I'm like, that's just so many words.
Well,
So many.
especially since we've written that many words, at least, I mean, for me, it's at least twice over, you know, especially with all my rewrites and stuff. So if we wanted to
Oh,
count
yeah.
Misrule, like all of the drafts I did, it would probably be closer to like 400K or something
my God.
crazy like that. Yeah.
I'll never complain about a 10-page paper for my master's.
Yeah.
I will
Like
never
I think back on
complain.
my
Wow.
schoolwork and I'm just like, I crank out 10 pages a day now. Like, and that's on a light
You can write
day.
my papers anytime. Feel free.
Nah.
You're like, nope. I tried. I had to try.
Don't do arson. Don't plagiarize, children.
So do we want to get a little, spoilery for the end of Misrule here since we're getting toward the end? Is that all right with everybody?
Yeah, that's fine as long as we air after the pub date.
Yes, we are airing after the pub date.
Totally
We
fine.
always give a spoiler warning. So
Yeah.
we do we'll do probably something on theme like do not pass unless thy wants spoiler.
Yeah, sounds
Rico,
good.
Rico
Just
will
use
figure
that,
it out.
exactly that.
Yeah.
Just cut that.
Nailed it,
Yeah,
Bella.
nailed it. That was off the top of my head. Thank you.
Yeah.
So why did you choose to forego the happily ever after? And why was it 100 years later? Where we were kind of discussing that. And I hate when stories have a happily ever after, like everything just wraps up really tidily. So I appreciated like this sort of like intentionally messy ending because they had such a messy relationship.
Mhm.
Like there was so much betrayal and angst and lying. I mean, not to get too spoilery, but it goes back and forth, that double crossing continuously throughout Misrule and even in Malice, but really like the fact that she could have woken her up at any point in 100 years and chose not to for her own selfish reasons. I love that you did not let that go. Because who would let that go? Like I lost 100 years of my life and you killed everybody I loved and knew. No, I don't love you anymore.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm confused. I'm attracted to you, but like, I don't trust you. And I loved that Alice had to get her space and figure out who she was outside of that relationship because even though Aurora was sleeping, her life revolved around her. She visited her every day, brought her food, talked to her, like took care of her. And when she was free, she was still trying to win back her favor. It was always about this love story. And I think what both of these characters realized was their power, right? They came into their own outside of one another, but also how it brought them together. But you didn't have them end up together quite as neatly. And I really appreciated that. but why? I want to know what your thought was.
Yeah. So, and that was part of the reason that Misrule was so hard to write, is because I wrote Malice in a bubble. Like, nobody knew who I was. Nobody even really knew. I didn't even tell my parents that I was writing books again. I was like, I'm not going to tell them until I sold a book. So it was kind of like this dinner where I was like, I've been writing again and I got a book deal. Yay. Like, surprise. And so that bubble, I didn't realize at the time, was so helpful. And with Misrule, I did not have that. And so pretty much immediately after Malice published, I started getting the DMs and getting tagged in posts and please, please, please let them end up happily after ever. And so I'm like feeling immense pressure from the reader community of, this is what we want. And at the same time, I'm like, I can't just give, like, it's like counterintuitive a little bit, because you're just like, I can't just give them what they want, because I want to sell books. And then, like, I want to buy the story. But at the same time, I'm coming at it from an author's point of view. And it's kind of like what you were describing, like the story has its own integrity. And I felt that to give them that neatly happily ever after. And the moment when that would have happened is the kiss, and after that final battle, and they're kind of realizing how to make that new power for Aurora, or Alice realizes this, and she they have that like kiss where Aurora is like, I still love you, and even after everything. And so that would have been the moment where they go to the palace together, and they ascend to the throne together, and then happily ever after the end. But I just couldn't do that, because it's like you said, Aurora wakes up and her entire life is gone. Like, for all she knows, she went to the tower in book 1. Alice was there. She pricks her hand. She falls asleep, and she wakes up, and it's like everything is gone. And this person that I trusted above everybody else is the one who took it from me. So she has a lot of righteous anger. And we kind of understand that. And at the same time, Alice is kind of discovering things about Aurora. Alice has learned what it's like to be in power. Like the book is the love story in book 2, but it also is about power and who has it, because Alice is starting to realize all of the ways that Aurora had control over her without even understanding that she did. Like the fact that if they had gotten married in book 1, if Aurora had never been cursed, Alice would have been, quote, queen with Aurora in this palace where there are literal tapestries of her people being murdered. And so, like, that's tough. And so we had, like, all of these complicated, messy parts between them that the happily ever after to me just didn't make sense at all. And so with the way that they had betrayed each other, and they do betray each other continually, it did not make sense as a writer for them to just be like, okay, we're done, or we're getting together, we're staying together. But at the same time, I think love is so complex and messy in and of itself. That we have these people who hurt us, sometimes a lot, and we still find ourselves drawn to them. And sometimes that turns out to be okay. Sometimes that's not healthy. And so that's another reason why, one, I needed Aurora to kind of like realize her privilege. And so that is why, like, another huge spoiler here is she does not take the crown, but kind of like dissolves the monarchy and like makes this whole new thing. Because otherwise we've got this ruler who has lost her power, demands it back, and then everybody just kind of gives it to them. Why? So I needed Aurora to kind of realize her own failings and the way that her country and her crown and her realm have hurt other people. And so tried to make amends for that and to start over with something else. But then I needed Alice to realize that her entire life had been spent in this one place, and she only knew this one environment, and she didn't know anything else. She didn't even know who she was. And so you can't really be, I think the message, if there is a message at the end, you can't really be with someone and give them your whole self if you don't know who that is. And so I think at the end of the book, Alice realizes that she didn't know herself before in Malice. She found this power and she kind of buried herself under this power in this other persona. She let Mortania call a lot of the shots. And so at the end of the book, she's still kind of a question mark in her own mind. And so they wouldn't have been able to reconcile unless Alice had a clear sense of self. And so she goes off and kind of does whatever she needs to do to get her own mental clarity. The 100 Years thing, I don't want to say it was random, but I was like, this is a fairy tale. It's 100 years.
I'm so glad I asked you that question because we were like, maybe it's a parallel to how we started with 100 years.
Sure,
And then it was like,
No, but was it supposed to mirror the original sleeping curse and
the
like their
Sleeping
love is asleep for
Beauty.
100 years?
Yeah. That's it.
Thank you for such an honest answer.
100 years.
Honestly, this like talk about, just being authentic. I love that. Really comes back to the moral of the story, right? Being authentic to ourselves. I also think that another moral was what you said, which was like, you can't love someone fully unless you know yourself. And I think that's really important for the young readers and listeners out there who read this book. And if they take anything away, I think it's that. And also like perspectives, like hearing other people out, keeping an open mind, being open to seeing things from another person's point of view.
That's a big thing.
Aurora and Alice have to learn that the hard way throughout this book. Lots of betrayal until we finally come together and create this beautiful Briar Court. But yeah, I think this book has a lot of morals for everybody out there. So yeah.
Since we're running out of time, maybe a couple last few questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk about this book all day, every day. I love fairy tale retellings. Sleeping Beauty actually did not used to be my favorite. I would say that this book has now made it one of my favorites.
So
the
originals are boring.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like, okay, like
and she
lives in a forest. She goes
Yep.
to sleep. Like Maleficent was always interesting.
Oh yeah.
Maleficent. So I did appreciate that this was like, we got the villain. So I will say that to our listeners out there. If you did not like Sleeping Beauty, this is nothing like that. Please keep reading. This will definitely change your perspective and is much better than the Maleficent movies, even, which were also really good. No, I mean, I think we usually do a segment where we ask you what you've been reading, and then we do a segment at the end of the show about what we're going to read. But before we do that, just to wrap up, are there any sapphic stories that you would recommend for our readers out there that are either similar to your book or like just ones that you found that the representation was just amazing? Chef's kiss, would 10 out of 10 recommend to a friend? Yeah.
I have a bit. The one that I loved, it's a YA. It's I think her name is Melissa or Marissa Bashardust. I think I might have said that incorrectly, and I apologize to her. But it's called Girl Serpent Thorn. It's amazing.
I have it sitting on that desk, and it is waiting for me to read it.
Total like monster girl story. Thinks her power is a curse.
Say no more. Okay.
Like, wonderful. Perfect.
I'm starting it tomorrow. I didn't know what I was going to start tomorrow. I'm going to start that tomorrow.
I'm going to go buy it tomorrow.
You should.
And start it. Yeah, this is great. Thank you. Okay, keep going.
And then Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri is amazing. Like morally gray lesbians don't know like. There's this one part where I can't tell without spoiling, but it's just like, am I going to kiss you or am I going to kill you? I don't know. Probably both.
That's my favorite.
It is perfect.
The tension.
Masterpiece. And then I'm reading another one right now that's not out yet. It's out this summer. It's called The Final Strife. And I've heard
very good things.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have the author's name in front of me, but it's coming out with Del Rey. And it is very, 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 very good. It's kind of, I'm getting like a little bit of like Game of Thronesy vibes to it, but it's not really set. It's set in a completely different world from that. But the political, I think I'm saying Game of Thrones because of the political intrigue and the moving parts to it. But it's sapphic and it's another kind of like enemies. Are they going to be enemies? Are they going to be lovers? We don't know. But that author,
enemies to lovers.
Yeah. It's hard to
It's
be.
really trending right now, and
masterful.
I'm not mad about it.
No, like
Yeah.
I need it to keep going personally.
So with your love for the Jasmine Throne, are you able to leverage your author status to get like the Oleander sword early? Are you able to?
So I'm actually really good friends with Tasha.
Oh, perfect.
Low key.
So, and I blurbed it. So I blurbed
Fair enough.
Jasmine Throne. So I'm actually my name is on that book too. But yeah, I've not gotten Oleander sword, but I have made it known in our DMs. I was like, could you please?
You're like, please, advanced reader, copy that to me immediately. Yeah.
I'm excited for that one for sure.
I love
On
that.
the same note, are there other fairy tale retellings that you would recommend everybody go read, other than I think we talked about Cinder and Uprooted?
Yeah. Let's see. Bashardist also did Girls Made of Snow and Glass, which is a Snow White one. And that one's pretty good. I think it's actually sapphic as well. It's been a long time since I read it. And then I'm trying to think of some other ones that I read. I'm like, I really collect them. I do. Nothing comes to mind right now, but the Girls Made of Snow and Glass was really good. I'm like looking at my shelves. Hazelwood wasn't specifically a fairy tale retelling, but it feels like it was. And then The Shadow in the Glass, J.J. Harwood. That one's a Cinderella one, and that one's really great.
That's on my list.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's less magic-y. It's more like a Faustian bargain one. So it's kind of like, inevitably that this is not going to go well, but you're here for the ride. And that one's really good.
Those can be so frustrating sometimes, but I love it.
Yeah.
But they can be frustrating.
Yeah. And then this one's it's been out for a while. I think Megan Spooner, Hunted. That one's a Beauty and the Beast one. And she writes a lot of retellings, I think, and I like her stuff.
I now have the longest to be read list.
Yeah, I know,
ever.
right? Yeah, same.
Yeah. Your books really brought out. Rico and I have known each other for years, and he realized in us picking this book how much I love fairy tale retellings, and this is like, it totally took me back to like elementary school, middle school, high school me that just devoured every single fairy tale retelling I could.
Same.
Because they're how could you not love like taking a misogynistic, like patriarchal tale and just giving you some badass princesses.
Yeah.
Like, come
And
on.
it's interesting too. A question I get asked a lot is, why do we think we're still obsessed with fairy tales since they're so old?
Yeah.
And actually, I was talking to J.J. Hardwood, who wrote The Shadow in the Glass, and she was telling me this theory about like almost like inherited respect. It's like a theory of like why some Americans are so obsessed with like the British monarchy, myself included.
Me too. But I am British partially, so I take that.
And that this plays into it because apparently like it's a theory that if our ancestors came from there, then we carry this inherited respect, like basically in our genes. And that like is the answer to our obsession because our ancestors were peasants who were also obsessed with the royals. And so it kind of like followed us here. And so I wonder if the same could be said for fairy tales, and they have been passed down for so long. It's like literally in our blood. And so we can't help but be fascinated with them. Just a thought.
I like that. I like that. That kind of explains like how I feel compelled to read them. Like I can't ignore when you tell me about a good fairy tale retelling.
Mm-hmm.
I have to know, even though I know the stories, I know what's going to happen. Like we said, the 100 years, it was like, oh yeah, like Sleeping Beauty. But everyone is so different. And I love that. And keep them coming is all I have to say.
Yeah. I have the next, my next series is Snow White. So it's called Crimson Crown. First book comes out in 2024, and it is the retelling.
2024?
I know.
Gotta wait.
I know. But it'll be worth it because I'm gonna make it worth it. It is a Tudor-inspired retelling of the rise of the evil queen, and I've mashed it up with the rise of Anne Boleyn. It is queer. So yeah.
My two favorite things. I love Henry VIII's wives. Henry VIII's wives, like the whole. I was obsessed with it as a kid. I wrote a 10-page paper in 7th grade on it.
Yes.
Oof.
I'm with you.
Okay. All right. I'm ready.
2024 will be back here, a whole hour about ending.
Please put me on that advanced reader copy list. Yes, we will be having you back. Rico, I've decided our 2024 lineup
Done.
already. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm the only one.
That's all we need to talk about. Those are my two favorite things. So I'm now I need it to be 2024.
Me too, because then the book will be done.
Yeah, you can be done with the
Future
character
Heather.
development. Future Heather is very happy for 2024. Yeah, very ready. Me and future Bella is also ready.
Yeah.
I don't like the waiting either. I'm very impatient. So I love
well,
that.
I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want people to know about the story in these two books that we haven't touched upon? Something specifically that maybe isn't found in the story itself, just something you really want readers to know.
I wrote it, and I almost made this my dedication for Misrule, and I think I did kind of sort of a version of it. I wrote Alice for every reader and every person who has felt like they did not belong and has felt that they don't have a voice and that they don't have power. And so however readers feel about it, if they don't like the book or whatever, I truly hope that there is something in the book that resonates with them, that they can see themselves in some form on the page, because I really strove to create a villain who is just like us in a lot of ways. And so I hope that there is a little bit of every reader on the page, because I think it is so important for us to see ourselves in stories and to feel that sense of being known, even if it is not by a real person. So I truly hope that there's something in the book that speaks to every reader, and that they can see this character who kind of like learns to trust herself, and that it is helpful to them in some way.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Representation matters.
Yeah. Well, everybody listening, by the time this episode releases, Misrule will have been released yesterday, May 10th. So definitely go out there and get a copy. I think I speak for Emma and Bella and that we all loved it. Like, it was great.
Yep.
Which is always the fear when we're talking with an author. What if we don't like it? But we did. We loved it. So
You fake it.
Yeah,
fake it till you make
no
it.
faking required. It was great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know you're active on social media. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter, Insta, and TikTok at Heather R. Walter 5, all accounts.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, same.
Bella, Emma, anything else?
No, thank you for speaking with us.
This is the awkward part where we're like, how do we
Okay,
how do we close this out? How you doing? How's the rest of your day looking?
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care. Hopefully we'll talk to you again in 2024.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you.
Good luck with the book promotion.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Bye.
Bye. Shit We've Read is hosted by Laura Benson, Jason Rico, and Bella Romero, with music by Joshua Chilton and editing by Jason Rico.
To join the discussion on this and all other books we've read, find us at Shit We've Read on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok.
For more information about us or to request transcripts, please visit shitwe'veread.com.
This podcast is part of the ByLo Network. Visit ByLoNetwork.com for more great geeky podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.